Safety first.
Hey guys, what's up and welcome to my channel. This week I am so excited because I feel like I'm doing something a little bit different than my normal videos and projects. I have 3 projects I have planned out to show you guys what you can build with these simple, old 2x4. So if you are a beginner or you want to get started in woodworking and building things for yourself and getting more comfortable with power tools, these are going to be perfect projects for you. Also, these are not lame projects. These are actually cool projects that you can build and put in your home. So, all of that being said, let's get started. Okay, so this first project up is making a step stool, and this is the perfect little step stool if you have small children and they need to be able to reach a sink or a countertop. And if you don't have children, this is also great for adults for reaching those higher up things in our house, like in our kitchen cabinets, because we shouldn't be standing on chairs, because chairs are dangerous. So to make this stool, you are going to need a saw. I recommend a miter saw. And then if you don't have a miter saw, you can also use a circular saw. And if you go nice and slow and get a straight cut, you can use a jigsaw. And most people don't recommend using a table saw to do against the grain cuts, but whatever saw you choose, just be safe. And then beyond a saw, you will need a drill, you will need some screws, you will need a sander or sandpaper. And then this tool is totally optional, but you can also use a pocket hole jig or a Kreg Jig. Oh, and something I completely forgot, you will also need a measuring tape. That is important. So to make this stool, I started out by cutting out 4 pieces that were 15 inches long. And that's how wide I wanted my step stool to be. So if you want to adjust the width of your step stool, you'll just need 4 pieces cut to whatever dimensions you choose. And then I cut 2 pieces that were 14 inches long and 2 pieces that were 7 inches long. And I'm just gonna talk to my real beginners out there and explain something really quick. A 2x4 is called a 2x4 because those are the dimensions of the board. But you will find out very quickly that a 2x4 is not actually 2 inches by 4 inches. It is 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. I believe at one point a 2x4 truly was 2 inches by 4 inches, and at some point that changed. There's a long history lesson in there somewhere, but I just wanted to explain that is how I got 14 inches and 7 inches. And after making it through all of those cuts, I moved inside to start putting the step stool together. And the first step was making sure all of the boards were nice and sanded and looking pretty. 2x4s are one of the cheaper pieces of wood you can get, so you're definitely going to want to spend some time sanding and cleaning up the way they look. So this next part, there are 2 ways to do this. I did both so that you got to see how to do both. So this first option up is if you don't have a pocket hole jig or a Kreg Jig. So I took one of my 14-inch pieces and one of my 7-inch pieces, laid them side by side, and I wanted to connect the 2 pieces together. So what you're gonna do is take a normal wood construction screw and screw it in at an angle. And a little tip that I like to do to make screwing in at an angle just a bit easier is I'll take my screw, I screw straight down, then I back that screw up, and then using the hole I just created, I'm able to screw in at an angle a lot easier. I repeated that process 3 times until the 2 boards were nicely connected. And then if you do have a pocket hole jig, I repeated the process with the next 14-inch board and 7-inch board, and I made 3 pocket holes on the 7-inch piece and used those pocket holes to connect it to the 14-inch piece. And if you have a Kreg Jig but you've never used a Kreg Jig, I do have a video linked down below to help get you started making pocket holes. And now I had 2 new pieces that were connected together, so taking the 4 15-inch pieces, I laid those across these boards, and from here the step stool was really easy. I used wood construction screws to screw everything together, and the step stool was done. Now from here, you can finish your step stool however however you would like. You can paint it, you can stain it, you can leave it exactly how it is. For me, I gave the boards another good sanding to just further smooth everything out. I stained it, and then I finished it off with some polyacrylic. And this first 2x4 project is all done. I think this is a great first build because it gets you just familiar and comfortable with working with tools. And also, this is such a useful item. I already gave my step stool away because I had a friend that needed a step stool, so I do know this is actually useful. And also, it's such a quick and easy project that it's really fun to have something instantly tangible that you made. Okay, so this second project up is making a bench, and there is this skinny distressed bench that I have seen all over the internet. I know our house has one, I believe West Elm and Pottery Barn have their own version, and I also know Wayfair has their own version. And all of these benches are pretty expensive. So this is my version of that bench, but made out of 2x4s. Okay, I kind of lied. This project isn't solely made out of 2x4s. To make this project a little easier and a little bit more beginner friendly, I decided to make the top of the bench out of a 2x8. I know, I'm sorry, I lied. It won't happen again. So for this bench, you are going to need a saw. Again, I recommend a miter saw because for this bench, we are gonna have to do some angled cuts. So if you don't have a miter saw, I know you can also do angled cuts with a circular saw. And something I'm also now just thinking of, you can also use a hand saw and get a miter box if you don't have any electric saws. So beyond the saw, you are going to need a drill, some screws, again that very important measuring tape, a sander or sandpaper, and then again, this part is optional, you can use a Kreg Jig. So to make this bench, I started off taking that 2x8 and cutting it to 54 inches because that's how wide I wanted my bench to be. So however wide you want your bench to be, cut your 2x8 to that length. So now we get to have fun with some angled cuts. And if you do have a miter saw for this next section, you can either do a beveled cut or a miter cut. I did both ways so that you guys got to see both ways of doing this. If you do opt to do a beveled cut, you're going to tilt your saw to a 25-degree angle. And what I did is I made my first beveled cut, measured 20 inches down, and then made a second beveled cut so that I had two 25-degree angle cuts going in the same direction. If you opt to do a miter cut, you are going to rotate your saw to a 25-degree angle, and then you are going to flip your 2x4 to be on its side. And then I repeated the process of making a first cut, measuring 20 inches down, and making a second cut. And I repeated this process until I had 4 20-inch long pieces, and then I had to cut 2 pieces that were 9.5 inches long, but had angled cuts going in different directions. And for this part, I only used a miter cut because I just found it to be a little easier. So what I did is rotated my saw to a 25-degree angle to the right, made my first cut, measured 9.5 inches down, and then rotated my saw to the left at 25 degrees and made my second cut. Once I had those 2 pieces, I had all of the pieces I needed to start putting this bench together, so I moved inside and started sanding all of those pieces down. Now this next part is if you do have a Kreg jig or a pocket hole jig. What I did is I made 2 pocket holes on all of the 20-inch pieces on one side, and you're gonna wanna make sure that those pocket holes are on the pointy side. I'm not sure really how to describe it except the pointy side. And once I had 2 pocket holes on one side of the 20-inch long pieces, I made 2 pocket holes on both sides of the 9.5-inch pieces. And again, you're gonna want those pocket holes to be on the pointy side. This is gonna make it so that when you do put this bench together, you don't see the pocket holes or the screws. And then the legs were prepped and I was ready to put this bench together. So taking my 2x8 piece, I measured where I wanted my legs to go. I measured to the middle of the board, and then from the end of the board, I measured 5 inches in. And once I had that spot marked out, I took my first 20-inch piece and screwed this first leg in place. And then taking one of the second 20-inch pieces, I laid that right next to the first piece and screwed that in place. Then taking that 9.5-inch piece, I placed that between the 2 boards and used those pocket holes holes to screw this into place. This is gonna give your legs more stability and more structure. Then I repeated the process with the last 3 pieces that I had on the other side. And the only thing you wanna make sure you take into consideration when screwing these pieces together is making sure that middle piece is nice and level. And then from there, again, you can finish this bench however you would like. You could spend a long time sanding and really distressing this thing down. You can do as little or as much as you want to. What I did is just gave this bench another light sanding, and then I used 3 different stains, because when you use 3 different stains, you can get a really nice weathered and distressed look through the coloring. And I finished off this bench using some polyacrylic. And that completes this second 2x4 project. I love the way this bench turned out. I think this can be used in any room in a house. I could see it in a living room. I could see it in an entryway. I could see it in a bedroom. It really could be used anywhere. And also on the building side of things, it's really nice to get familiar with angled cuts and getting used to moving a saw blade around in different directions. So for this third and final project, this is definitely the most time-consuming of the 3 projects. The first 2 projects took me maybe an hour or so to make, whereas this third project took me roughly a day and a half. So all of that being said, this third project is making a faux box joint table. And if you don't know what a box joint is, that's totally fine. Stick with me, you will by the end of this. So for this table, you are going to need a saw. Again, I recommend a miter saw. And then this tool is totally optional, but if you do have it, I recommend using a table saw as well. And beyond those 2 saws, you will also need a drill, some screws, of course a measuring tape. You'll also need a sander, wood glue, and then if you do have these, and if you don't, I recommend getting them, having at least 3 large clamps. And then again, this tool is optional, but you can also use a Kreg Jig. So this first part is totally optional, but I squared off all of my 2x4s using my table saw. 2x4s come with rounded corners, so when you take a whole bunch of 2x4s and you squeeze them together, you're gonna have dips between all of those boards. So squaring off your board eliminates those dips and gives you a much smoother look. So if you don't have a table saw and you don't square off your boards, that doesn't mean you can't build this table. It's just gonna have a little bit of a different look. And after squaring off all of my boards, I double checked what the new width was, and my 2x4s went from 3.5 inches thick to 3.25 inches thick. And that small adjustment did actually change my measurements for this next section. The table I made was pretty large, and I planned on building it and putting it in my basement behind the new sectional that I got just a month ago. And if you've been following along with my basement makeover series, yes, I finally have some furniture in my basement. I'll cover that in a different video. Because I wanted my table to span the whole backside of this sectional, my table needed to be 94 inches long, 38 inches high, and 15 inches wide. And of course, you can make your table whatever dimensions you choose. So with the dimensions of my table, here is my cut list and also how I came up with that cut list so that you can follow along with whatever dimensions you choose. Knowing that my table was going to be 15 inches wide, I knew I was going to have to do 10 rows of 2x4s stacked together. So to make up the top of the table, I had 5 pieces cut to 94 inches and 5 pieces cut to 87.5 inches. And for the 2 sides, I was gonna need 20 pieces altogether. So I had 10 pieces cut to 38 inches and 10 pieces cut to 34 3/4 inches. And once I made it through squaring up all of the boards and getting all of those boards cut to the right measurements, I moved inside to start putting this table together. Taking my first 3 pieces, 2 of them were 38 inches long and 1 of them was the 87.5 inch long piece. I used some pocket holes and glue to screw those 3 pieces together. And again, if you don't have a Kreg Jig, you can just screw these pieces together using normal screws and screwing it at an angle. But you're definitely going to want to make sure you screw these first 3 pieces together, because this is what you build the table off of. And once my first 3 pieces were screwed together, I grabbed my next 3 pieces. I grabbed one piece that was 94 inches long and 2 pieces that were 34 3/4 inches. I sanded all of those boards down, laid them on top of the first 3 pieces, made sure everything was lined up, and then used wood glue and screws to screw and hold everything together. And then from there, I started alternating between the 2 sizes. And what that will do is start to create a faux box joint look at the corners. A real box joint would be if you only had 2 pieces of wood with notched out pieces at the ends that create a box shape. But because this is multiple pieces of wood screwed together, this is a faux box joint. And then after I got like 3 or 4 rows done, I was able to then stand this table up and work on it that way. I found this to be easier to make sure that this table was staying square, it was staying level, and also then I could add the clamps to create a tighter bond between all of the pieces of wood. And since my table is only 10 rows of boards put together, these 10 rows were done in no time. And then came the fun part of sanding. Yay! Because anytime you screw a bunch of wood together, nothing is ever going to be flush, so you're gonna have to spend a good amount of time sanding. And for this first part, I switched to a belt sander to just make this process go a lot faster. But if you don't have a belt sander, you can always use an orbital sander. It'll just take a little bit longer. And if you don't have an electric sander, well, you are going to learn the thing that every great DIYer has to learn: patience. Woohoo! So if you do have a belt sander, what I did is I started out using some 80 grit sandpaper to very quickly smooth all these boards out and level everything out. And then I switched to a 120 grit to further smooth things out and just make it look a lot cleaner and prettier than the 80 grit. And then I finished off this table using my orbital sander and some 320 grit sandpaper to really smooth everything out and make it look real pretty. And then all that was left to do was staining and top coat. And you're definitely going to want to stain this table because painting it would cover up that cool detail at the corners. And that completes this third and final 2x4 project. If you build this table, I think so many people are going to be very impressed that you built this. And this is also a great beginner table because there is no fancy cuts. This is a bunch of straight cuts put together in a creative way to get a nice cool detail at the corners. This also teaches you about laminating and sticking a whole bunch of boards together with glue and pressure. And that is it, guys. I had so much fun making these 3 projects. If you are a beginner, I hope you learned something. And if you do try out any of these projects, please send me a picture on Instagram. I would love to see how your versions turned out. Also, let me know in the comments down below which of these 3 projects is your favorite. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.